Hi, I want to talk about the Sharpshooter's meta and full class breakdown now. So if all you care about is copying the build, here you go. And as far as weapons go, do not start with the fucking Fieldmaster. This thing is one of the worst guns in the game because of that right there. You can set up the Marksman so that you start with it, and this weapon is objectively better in like every way. So you're going to run the Marksman like this, or I'm sorry, like this, so that you can start with it, and then you're going to either immediately ditch that shit for the explosive Contech, and honestly, you can just run this the entire game, because this is the second best sharpshooter weapon. You could go like the SMG route that your sponsor was posting about, but naturally, you just want to end on the Vulcan. If the Vulcan gets nerfed, you can either stick with SMG Sharpshooter, or you can stick with Explosive Shotgun Sharpshooter. Sharpshooter is a very good class for the simple fact that she's not a class at all. She's literally just a stat stick to make weapons stronger. And this game is more defined by the weapons you use than the classes you play, which is so ass backwards. So, let's get let's get into what makes Sharpshooter good, and let's do the full class breakdown. So the first thing you do need to understand is this right here. Getting double weak spot damage when you're in Z time is a big deal. And the first thing you need to understand about the Sharpshooter is bullet guns suck. All of her guns are terrible. Literally, just do not use any of this shit. The Fieldmaster sucks. The Marksman kind of sucks. This gun really fucking sucks. Look at this. Yeah, that's usable. Okay. The Samaritan is so close to being good, but for the most part, the Samaritan sucks. It does okay DPS. The problem is it's just out DPS'd by everything else. So, every explosion in this game counts as a headshot. Just all of them. Just that's first thing you need to know. So, you shoot someone in their feet and it counts as a headshot with an explosive weapon. Which means you always get the explosive headshot bonus. You always proc all of your headshot perks. So, all of this shit sucks. Why would you ever use a marksman that does 142 damage per shot and can miss heads, whereas the Contech does 460 damage per shot, always hits a headshot, and kills multiple people per shot? It's just objectively better in every single way. Alright, now let's start breaking down the skills. So, Sniper is a terrible skill. This skill is complete flavor and should never be used for any reason. While crouching, 25% less spread decay, recoil recovery rate, and 10% weapon damage. All that is cool. However, if you are in a situation where you can comfortably crouch, then you are already winning the game, and this does basically nothing for you. Because 10% is not enough to reach any breakpoints on any weapons, and because you should only be using AoE weapons with this class, because they, 1, do the most damage, 2, are the most accurate, there's no, like, the accuracy increase stuff does not fucking matter. And the weapon damage doesn't help those at all, because it's just not enough. Hunter, on the other hand, is okay, I guess. Reducing spread while walking is nice because you should never not be walking. And walk at full speed while aiming down sights. I mean, you can just look at this. This is nice for kiting. It's not much, but it's nice, I guess. These two perks are very inconsequential. Okay, if you haven't taken damage in the last 10 seconds, deal 25% increased weapon damage to weak spots. This is a total trap. One, it is actually surprisingly difficult not to take any form of chip damage in 10 seconds. Because something will sneak some projectile in you. This has about a 50% uptime, give or take. Deal 25% increased weapon damage to enemies that have at least one affliction applied. This is obviously the best for two very simple reasons. In multiplayer, everything has some kind of affliction on it. Bleed for Ninja, Stumble for everyone else, Enfeeble from Engineer. Like, in multiplayer, it's really fucking rare to not have an affliction. However, you can also take this, and it's completely fine. Weapon damage to weak spots while aiming down sights is increased by 20%. These two perks are basically on par with each other. In solo, I would take Big Shot over the affliction damage one, though. Because since every AoE weapon always hits weak spots, this is just a free permanent 20% damage. So fully preventing the next instance of melee damage is nice. Problem, 25-second cooldown is terrible. I get that you're supposed to use this with this. The problem is that's only 5% more damage than this. And this has no conditional, and this fucking sucks. Because, like, if you could take 1 second off the cooldown per kill, I would actually say this is pretty good. But the fact that you have to get hit once 25 seconds, like you have to wait that 25 seconds for it to come back, it's just not impactful. Especially considering on Hell on Earth that, like, a Gorefast does, like, 20 damage in a hit, and, like, a Scrake does, like, 20 damage in a hit with tier 4 armor. So it's, like, just reducing one... The only time this is useful is for boss waves and 6-player Hell on Earth specifically. So, you know, for whatever that's worth. Taking 25% reduced damage while sprinting is just obviously the best. Because, you know, you're constantly sprinting in this game. These perks are both kind of mediocre, but not taking damage from projectiles while you're running away, or just the ability to not take damage while you're getting out of the damage zone, usually ends up being better. Also, the fact that this doesn't work against projectiles, which ironically is kind of where, like, the most damage I personally take comes from, just makes this terrible. So, this perk is interesting. Carrying an additional 2 syringes is nice, and making them full heal you initially is also pretty nice. However, I just feel like movement speed is more important. Really, the problem with this is taking damage is not something you want to be doing, but this does guarantee that after you take that first bit of damage, you're out of there. There's no more damage coming in because you're moving faster than the damage. Though I wouldn't really blame you if you took this. This might be better in multiplayer, but I definitely feel like this makes me win more in solo. So, now it's time for the biggest noob trap tier. Shooting an enemy's weak spot grants a stack of perfection up to 10 stacks. Failing to hit an enemy will remove all stacks. Deal 7% increased damage per stack. So, this perk is simultaneously really good and powerful, but also I really wouldn't recommend taking it for a very specific reason. The biggest problem with this perk is if you shoot the ground with an AoE weapon, even if that counts as a hit, it's still a miss. However, every shot with an AoE weapon will proc this. So if you feel confident in hitting your shots, and you know you're only going to use, like, Explosive Shotgun and Vulcan, you can get away with using this. And if you're even remotely decent at aiming, this will actually go crazy hard. So, I'm not against this perk. Now, I will say, if you plan on using, like, Marksman, Samaritan, this stuff, do not ever, read my lips, do not ever use this shit with precision weapons. You cannot, unless you're, like, an elite fucking top 5% on the aim labs kind of aimer, this perk ends up being a gigantic noob trap. Because there is a very large contingent of the gaming landscape that thinks they're really, really, really good at video games, and they end up being really not as good as they think, and this kind of thing just totally traps them. Now, explosive weapons nullify the biggest weakness of this, so there is a way to make it work. This perk is okay, I just don't know why you'd use it. 20% increased ballistic and cold damage only to large enemies. Why? These other two give more, like, substantially more than 20% damage to everything. So why is this 20% only relegated to large enemies? Yeah, I would think if you're going to add the restriction that you can only get this bonus versus, like, 2 out of the 20 or whatever enemies in the game, that it would be like 100% increased damage. Because this is 70% increased damage, and this is 35% increased damage. Why is the more restrictive thing limited to giving you an even lesser bonus? It's retarded. This perk is just so awful. And whenever you kill a large enemy, you get a stack up to 10 stacks. 10 stacks let you deal 15% more damage. So, let me get this straight. Even with the secondary perk secondary effect fully stacked up, this is 35% increased damage. This is 35% increased damage to everything. This is 35% increased damage to 2 enemies. What the fuck? Or, I'm sorry, 2 enemies plus bosses. What the fuck? Why would you ever... Why would you ever... You see what I'm saying? Like, what's the point here? Anyway, destroying enemy critical hit zones. My reminder, Vulcan, grenade launcher, explosive shotgun, all of those, every attack from those guarantees a destroy on a critical hit zone, just FYI. Grants a stack of whatever the fuck. Up to 5 stacks maximum. Stacks last for 10 seconds, and importantly, they fall off one at a time. And each stack is deal 7% increased damage per stack. Okay, so this is 35% increased damage for basically 100% of the wave, which will combine with this 20 or 25% damage, giving you just permanent 55% increased damage. Okay. And now, the grenade. The thing you need to know about the grenade, I don't know why I said that. That was weird. Anyway, look, the point is, this grenade is mediocre. The problem with this is, have you ever used it? If you use this to stun a Hell on Earth, Scrake / Flesh Pound, they legitimately break out in... I literally timed this on stream. We were recording it. We hit it with a stopwatch. They are literally stunned for less than 1... Or it's like 0.9 to like 1.1 seconds. They are not stunned for very long at all. Which means, why even bother stunning them? And by the way, that's with this perk taken. Anyway, the explosion radius on this grenade is already huge. Making it bigger kind of just doesn't do anything. And you aren't using this grenade for its initial explosion. Trust me, the initial explosion is not the strong part of this grenade. Freezing things for longer is kind of the best use of this, because what you really want to be doing with this is freezing enemies at a choke point while you're running away from them, so you can proc this to get your thing back online. That is this class's loop, but we'll talk about that when we get there. So increasing the explosion damage by 300 is cool, I guess, but as you can see, this does give it the damage that allows it to kill a gore fast. So it goes from not being able to kill a clot to being able to kill a gore fast, which is actually pretty decent. The problem is, do you actually want your grenades initial explosion killing things? The answer to that on this particular class is no, not really. This is actually one of those instances where, so imagine there's a doorway, right? You throw this grenade in the doorway, and then you just leave behind blizzard / black ice, and that will continuously freeze and refreeze. Let's say 2 clots try to walk through a doorway. You freeze them for 3 to 4 seconds, and now nothing can get through. Scrakes, flesh pounds, all of that stuff is stuck behind them. It's a big choke point it creates. Speaking of, Blizzard is just 3 little things on the ground that continuously deal frost damage, which allows them to refreeze. As you can see in the video, this does enough frost damage to refreeze things. And the refreeze triggers really, really often, I have to say. Black Ice is effectively the same thing, but it just applies Enfeeble. It's the same idea, but it gives them Enfeeble instead of refreezing them. Which, this could be better in multiplayer because Enfeeble's really strong. Well, actually, this could fall off in multiplayer. See, it really depends. If people aren't bringing, like, Enfeeble grenade launchers or whatever, this is really good. But the moment someone brings an Enfeeble grenade launcher, this perk does literally nothing. Because you can only apply so much Enfeeble. So if one guy has an Enfeeble G33 or an Enfeeble Molotov from Firebug, this literally ends up doing nothing because you can't have, you know, you can only have so much Enfeeble. Whereas you're kind of the only class that can freeze things. So refreezing is just uniquely strong for you. Plus the loop that we're going to talk about in a second. Enemies hit by cryo grenade explosion have their vulnerability to ballistic force and cold damage increased by 20%. This perk is weird. 5 seconds is not long enough to be very impactful. So that's like weird problem number 1. 2, ballistic force and cold is just a mediocre damage type. Because like none of the AoE goodness weapons are affected by this. So this is really only for the Samaritan. The problem is the Samaritan is just not as good as any explosive option, because somehow the sniper perks synergize less with snipers than explosive weapons. Thank you, Tripwire. Very cool. But you know, it is what it is. Anyway, this perk is also pretty nice. The radius of your blizzard or black ice ground effects increased by 70%. I swap back and forth between these all the time. I wish this was a duration increase and not a radius increase. That would make this a definite, like, you will always use this kind of thing. Sorry about that. Anyway, so it's just nice. It doubles the size of these. And if you're wondering what they are, in the video, you see that little puddle that just got created? Yeah, it creates 3 of those little puddles around. So it makes those twice as big, which is actually huge. But this does run into the issue where it's just too big. It's just too big. It already fully more than covers every choke point in the game as is. Doubling its radius doesn't really make it more or less impactful. I really wish this was a duration increase. So this, cryo grenades explode a second time after the first explosion. And as you can see in the video, it drops 6 puddles. So if you look here, you see it does the second explosion. You see those, how there's like 6 of those lingering clouds on the ground? That's like 6 blizzards. So it allows you to double dip on this perk's value, which allows you to double dip on this perk's value because these are refreezing. And now you apply the refreeze twice as fast. Stumble affliction and the extra damage is cool, I guess. I'd rather it just didn't do any extra damage. Though the stumble does, like, effectively guarantee a refreeze. The second part of this is a complete, like... I don't know why the second part of this perk exists, honestly, because, like, they're already frozen. So, like, look, you can see in the video they're already frozen. The only thing that I guess is kind of nice about this is if the initial explosion misses a scrake or whatever, they'll stumble into the second explosion. I guess, but the second explosion happened so fast. Look, I'm going to be honest with you. The entire second half of this perk is literal random bullshit that they just vomited onto the skill because for some reason they thought a second explosion wasn't strong enough, despite the fact that it's clearly like the strongest thing. You know, doubling every grenade and every grenade perk is really fucking good. If this was just 20% generic damage increase, I could see this being good. Hold on a minute, I'm curious about something. Do they even... Hold on. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, 4... Okay, so yeah. I thought for a second there... So yeah, what? You get 2 extra Samaritan shots for 20% damage, or doubling all of your grenade perk effects, and doubling your freeze potential. I'll let you decide. You know, I'm gonna assume you're smart enough to figure out why that's better. Death's Hand deals 30% increased damage to enemies it has not hit before is kind of weird because it already one-shots like everything in the game except for really tanky things. I think there's like one enemy, like a siren or something, that this allows it to one-shot that it couldn't one-shot before. So I guess that's cool, but whatever. Arrow's final explosion applies 200 knockdown affliction, okay, and deals 30% increased damage. That's cool, I guess. But, whatever. And what is that competing against? Heal 3 health every time the arrow pierces an enemy 14 times per use. Oh, okay. So, very minor damage increases for 1 instance of damage, be it the first or last, versus this just heals 40% of your health. Huh. No, that's really well balanced. That's really well thought out. Arrow is in flight, gain 20% increased weapon damage. This is acceptable. If you use this and like this with the Samaritan, that's kind of what you have to do to make it viable. But this perk is acceptable. However, I like this for survivability. But honestly, you could argue that this is already enough. You could run this. Hell, you can even run it like this, because this class doesn't have good access to movement speed. Personally, I swap between these two all the time. I just prefer this because I know that as long as I don't, you know, have to worry about damage, then I'll never lose. Which is also why healing is bad. I can't wait to talk about how bad the medic class is. And, you know, they're both honestly about on par. More damage or more intervals to never die. Genuinely, and I don't mean this as like a sarcastic joke, that one's up to you. Deal 30% increased damage to large Zeds is literally just this perk, but for every hit instead of only 1 hit. That makes it significantly more tempting to take. Especially when you see it killing those big Zeds in like 4 bounces like that. Arrow's projectile speed is increased is kind of bad because This thing is strong when it's active, not when it's actually doing things, which sounds counterintuitive. Whenever the arrow kills an enemy, increase its max number of targets by 1 up to 5 max. This is okay. I just prefer this because I'd rather have the utility to kill like 2 or 3 big heavy guys on Hell on Earth every use. However, if you use this to gain more value from this or this perk, I would understand that. This has more synergy with these. This is the more synergistic perk. This is the more greedy perk. And I'm really greedy on damage most of the time, so I prefer this, but honestly, I can understand the value in taking this. This, however, is fucking terrible. Freeze all enemies in a cone in front of you. This is garbage. Just look at the video, dude. The cone is not that big and not that powerful, especially when you consider that you can just use this and that will, like, stumble the big Zeds as opposed to this freeze, which basically controls them for the same amount of time. Really, this is the only bad perk, honestly. So, killing faraway enemies granting 6 gadget energy. This is one of those fast cooldown gadgets. So, getting 6 energy is really important. The problem is it needs to be like 20 meters away. So, it actually does need to be really far away. So, really, the only time you're gonna use this is if you throw a grenade in a choke point and you've got all this crowd control going and you're running away from the choke point and then you turn and, like, Vulcan it. Though I will say, just like 1 or 2 Vulcan shots with like 7 enemies in a choke point will give you your gadget back like instantly with this perk, which is really strong. Increasing the max number of targets is just not as valuable as getting the gadget back quicker. I will say if you only play multiplayer and you just never are far enough away to activate this, then obviously you go with this. Really, this is more, are you playing solo or are you playing multiplayer? And if you are playing multiplayer, do you expect to be the last one alive running around kiting? If the answer to both of those questions are yes, then you take the increased gadget cooldown. If the answer is no, I only play multiplayer and I think I won't be the last one alive most of the time, then you can get away with taking this. These perks are just all kind of bad. So the 7 micro missiles is what I have found to be the best because 1, it's just 7 free kills before you eat up any charges of the missile, which is nice. Like if you use micro missiles plus this, you can legitimately let this, like, okay, you could do, I wouldn't do this. I would still stick to this, but you could do this, though you really shouldn't. You really shouldn't. This, plus this does allow you to kill, like, 7... Or, I'm sorry, this, plus this does allow you to kill... The initial gadget has, like, 12 uses, and then you're getting... So, you're getting, like, 23 kills per use of the actual gadget, plus the 7. You can kill 30 guys in a early wave with this. So this setup does allow you to kill like 30 things once or twice per wave. However, this does fall off hard in the later waves, and later waves are so much more difficult than the early waves. I just don't think building for that is really like a good thing to do. Anyway, getting 7 free kills at the snap of a button is just valuable for economy because it's just 7 things you don't have to spend ammo on. This also just blasts like 1300 damage in the face of a Scrake, which is actually pretty decent. This is whatever. The explosion damage increase by 125% is cool and synergizes with some other perks. We're just not taking anything it synergizes with. And unfortunately, as you saw, and this is what seals the deal on this perk for me. So just look at the video. That Scrake doesn't die. This is not enough damage to kill that Scrake. So, like, to me, what's the point, you know? This is also pretty terrible. Freezing them on contact and dealing 30% increased damage to frozen enemies. Things that you need this damage increase against, like large Zeds and bosses, are only frozen for like a second or less. So you aren't really, like, freezing them and then hitting them again and benefiting from this. Oh, jeez. So, it's just mid. This is one of those perks that sounds really nice, and then you try to use it, and you're like, wow, it's very underwhelming. Because on harder difficulties, the freeze just doesn't last long enough to matter. And everything that isn't, this is the catch-22 with this ultimate in general, right? Everything that is not super tanky dies in the initial hit from this. Everything that is super tanky needs like 5 hits from this ultimate to die. So things like this, I mean, you could see literally everything but the Scrake is dying instead of getting frozen. Because, like, the Scrake and the Bloat are the only things strong enough not to get instantly killed. So what? Per activation, you freeze like 2, maybe 3 targets with this because everything else is dying instantly? Like, what is even the point? But yeah, I think Sharpshooter overall is one of the better classes. Probably not better than Firebug and Engie, but it is probably also, I think, my most played class. Just because it's the class that throws out the most damage. Yes, even more than Ninja, and that's because of the proficiency bonus. This class just does the most damage and gives the most damage to the best weapons. And because this game is significantly more sided based on the weapons you use than anything else, it is pretty good. All right. That's going to be it for this. Let's talk about the Ninja now.